I had something happen the other day that made me think about the times that I've lived through during my long life. And for women my age, one of those things was discrimination. And this is my story and my mother's story. And I remember my mother was divorced and had raised her two children. And I was 18 and newly married and lived in Lincoln, Nebraska. And my brother was about 15 and still lived at home when she got a good job at Lincoln in a department store. And she worked there for a while and got a job was made an assistant buyer. Not an assistant, as a buyer. And she'd worked her way up to being a buyer. Anyhow, I watched my mother one morning. I was over there and I watched her put on a suit and put her papers in her briefcase and go off to work. And she'd walk through the front door and then walk through her neighbor's laundry. Because all she could afford at that time, even though she was assistant buyer, for a major department store chain. Let me make that clear. I'm not going to say who they were, but it was a chain store that was national, the whole country. And she walked through that door, and she lived in a basement apartment with those tiny little windows, and that's where her and my brother lived. And one half of the basement was the apartment, and the other half, where the entrance was the landlady who lived upstairs. And I lived in the same piece of property, but in a converted garage, which was 2.5 rooms, really. And I watched my mother go off to work there. And one day she found out, she was the only woman in this store that held this position, and she found out that the men made a lot more money than her, and a lot more, and that explained why they were supporting families and had a home, a nice little ranch home, and my mother was living in this dinky basement apartment. She complained about it, and she wanted a raise, and her boss had the nerve to tell her that, well, men had families to support, and they made more money than my mother did. And that was why they made more money, because they had families to support. Now, one of those men, who was a friend of my mother's, was a bachelor, and he lived in a ranch-style home, and he didn't have anybody to support but him. And my mother still had a child to support. I guess they thought he was chopped liver or something. And after working for this major chain for 25 years, I ended up watching her when she was very old, and her paycheck, her retirement check, was $169. And her health care, I never could figure out her health care, how it worked. Her health care came to more than her check did. So it just wiped out her check. She paid like $230 a month for her check. She received, she paid $235 a month towards her health insurance, and she received $169 from her pension. So she had to take part of her Social Security money, because that's what she was living on, what she'd earned in Social Security. And that's what 25 years of work had done for my mother in a major department store chain. Can you imagine today doing that? Can you imagine how you would feel doing that, working your whole life and ending up with just Social Security to live on? Even though you saved and did everything right. I wanted to be The first time I heard of a women's discrimination, that I became aware of such a thing, and I just accepted it. It was accepted in our society. And I was about 12, and I remember expressing to my mother that I had felt this way for some time, and I felt it for years, that I wanted to be a vet and a veterinarian. And I loved animals, and I loved taking care of them, and I would have been good at this. My mother told me is don't bother to apply because it's only for women and the schools won't take you. So I wasn't a fighter in those days. Until I was in my late 30s, I was very passive really. And I just accepted that. And I never thought about fighting for it or even going for it, because I'm sure there were some women vets somewhere that managed to get training and managed to have a job as a women's vet. And during the time when I lived in Lincoln, and this is before my mother moved to Lincoln, I became aware of this organization, the National Organization for Women was starting, and this women's lib, I think it was starting. It was the women's lib movement had started. That's what was, and there was a big to-do about it. And they started a group in Nebraska, and I went to it, and I only went to one meeting because it just did things that I wasn't comfortable with. They wanted to change names and everything. And you know what things mean. And like they wanted to change the word men from so many things. And we know that the word men can also mean mankind. And it doesn't mean men in general. But anyhow, that's the way it went. And I felt like they just wanted to turn women into men, and that was their goal. And so I quit it. I had hoped to see the women's lib movement to press the importance of the feminine. But anyhow, that's what I had hoped, that it would be a recognition of women and what women accomplished in this world. And now it has done some good in that we can get the jobs we want, but it has done some damage into married life, and I'm not going to go into that. That's a different subject. Let's leave it at that. But I went on to become divorced. I left my husband after 4 years, and now when we were married, he was 8 months younger than me, and he needed a car to get to work. He was in the military, and he was riding from our apartment. This is when we were first married, and they wouldn't give it to him because he was underage at that point, but I was of age. So they put me on the loan. So if we didn't pay for the car in time, they could go after me. And we paid the car in time, and everything was timely done. And so when I left him, and I ended up needing an apartment, and when I left him, we lived in New York. We'd moved to New York. He'd gotten discharged, and he had his discharged, and we moved back to New York. He was from New York. And I got a small apartment there, and it didn't have a refrigerator, and I desperately needed a refrigerator, and I went to get, and I thought of that loan, and I thought, oh, good, I got credit, and I'm glad we took that out of my name now. I wasn't too happy at the time. And they wouldn't give me the credit. He got the credit. His name was not on that loan. My name was. But I didn't get the credit. He got the credit. And it's a good thing it was wintertime, because I took perishables and put them out on the windowsill outside my bedroom window, the one window that was really, it was like a railroad apartment, and the back bedroom. And that's the windowsill I used because nobody else would see anything back there. And that's where I went the whole winter. And out of desperation by then, I had got a job as a belly dancer, and I made as much money then as I did in a working full-time in a week. Just working weekends, I made enough money that it equaled out what I made in a week. So I saved money, and by the end of wintertime, when it would have been really drastic then, I was able to buy a used refrigerator, and so we had a refrigerator. I worked as a belly dancer 3 or 4 years, I think. And I knew other belly dancers, and there was one, and she was a little more famous than I was, and she worked in a club in New York, and she had an apartment in New York, and I would stay with her when I had a job that I came back to New York late at night, and I would stay with her rather than ride the subway out to Queens Village, where I had an apartment at the time. And my babysitter lived upstairs from the apartment. I got back early enough from one job that I dropped my suitcase off at her building. Had a doorman, and he knew me, and I dropped my suitcase, the case that I brought my costume and everything in, off, and took a cab and went to this club to watch her, and they wouldn't let me in. And I'm making a little bit of a fuss about it, because I said, well, I don't want to sit with her. I will stay backstage. I just want to watch her perform. And they wouldn't let me in. And I said, this is ridiculous. They wouldn't let me in because I didn't have a male escort. I was alone. And finally, the line is piling up behind me, and finally this man said, she can come in with me. And the guy goes, oh, no, we can't do that, no way. I said, you people come in, he said, and he turned to me and he said, I am not letting you in here for any reason, just go away. And I said, but now I have a man. You said I couldn't go in because of a man. He said, just go away. And the man this man that had offered to take me in said, he thinks you're a prostitute. Now, can you imagine being thought of being a prostitute because you wanted to go see somebody perform and you didn't have a man with you? Eventually, I wanted to get out of the belly dancing, and I started looking for other jobs, and I had some training then. I had been taking college courses at night, and when I could afford it, in art, and I went for an art paste-up job, and the man yelled at me because why didn't he put in the ad that would make me think that this job would go to a woman? It was for men. And then I wanted to get a membership in a big art league, and it was in New York City, and I was a famous art league, and you could get jobs because of your membership there. And so I applied for it and sent in photos of my work. And they sent me a nice little letter. And I'm sorry I didn't keep it now. I don't know if there still exists, but I think they would probably have maybe not appreciate seeing this little note. But they mailed me and said that they only had male members. And I had trouble getting apartments too because I was a single woman. There's lots of things I could go on and on and on, but you get the idea that we were discriminated against and that it affected us profoundly. My mother, very profoundly. She rented her whole life, and she lived in 3 little rooms. The last place she lived, she never ended up with a 4-room apartment. She always had 3 rooms. And it kept me poor for a while. But eventually I got a job. I had enough college credits. I ended up with 30 college credits, which I think is a year's that time. It took me several years to get that. And then I stopped. I just couldn't go anymore. And but it was enough credits to make me eligible to take a civil service test. And I got hired to become, I got hired and started working there, and I worked there until I retired. And that job was, there really wasn't any overt discrimination against women with that job. You got hired on your test results, and you were able to take the test because of your college, how much college credit you had. And so I was in that environment, and I didn't really have any experiences then. I had married again, and my husband ended up being the assistant, he was a big shot in Medicaid. What happened to me, and so I never really ran into lots of experience then. But what happened to me the other day, and what brought this video about, is I was discriminated against, and it was a subtle discrimination. I don't think that the person never meant to discriminate against me. And I've noticed from a lot of other YouTube videos that women over 40 start complaining about feeling invisible. And I noticed that very strongly when I got around 40, and I became invisible because I had been very visible when I was younger. Anyhow, what happened is that I was waiting for services, and the woman was busy for something, and she saw me, and I'm waiting and waiting. And then she finishes, and just as she looks up, a young woman walks in, and she looks at me, but goes past me, and zeroes in on the young woman and walks over and says, "Can I help you?" Well, I'm not this little mild person I was when I was younger, and I said, "I was here first." I said it just like that. And that's what we have to do now on this. We don't have to put up with this kind of discrimination. I'm sure men aren't going to look at you, and there's things that you just can't overcome, but this kind of discrimination you can. And I think I'm going to end the video here. And oh, my name is Happy Jones. I keep forgetting to tell people that. And if this is your first time to my channel, welcome. If you are returning to it, well, hooray. I'm very glad to have you. And but if you like this video, please hit subscribe.